We want to go ahead and get started here. I know people will still be trickling in. We have quite a few folks joining us today. Glad you're here. I'm Betsy Nicholas, president of Potomac Riverkeeper Network. I have with me Dean Naujoks, the Potomac Riverkeeper, and we're going to talk to you about the catastrophic sewage spill that we have been facing in this region in the past few weeks. So it started back on Martin Luther King Day, January 19th, and has continued to flow for quite some time. We've had some temporary bypasses, steps forward, steps backwards. Um, our team at Potomac Riverkeeper, Dean and Evan, have been out there from the beginning watching this, monitoring it, trying to get the information out there because it's so important for our communities to stay safe and to understand the data and the science and what's actually happening now. But from here, we're going to have to move forward onto how do we fix this? How do we clean it up? And how do we make sure this never happens again? But those are the coming days. Right now, we're still dealing with the ongoing spill, trying to get the most accurate information out there to everyone, making sure that we stay safe, that we're not getting people sick accidentally by people not having the correct information or the up-to-date data on all of this. So we're going to go through, Dean's got a presentation for you, bringing you through on the timeline of what's happened, what we know, some of the back and forth on that. That's probably going to take about 25 minutes. And then we're just going to do your Q&A. During the time that he's talking, feel free to post your questions under Q&A. The chat's not live for this. So at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little box that says Q&A, and you can type your questions in there. I'll be going over those with Dean in the second part of this, and we will move forward from there. So let's go ahead and jump into this. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and friend, a long time, actually celebrating his 25th year as a riverkeeper, and about 12 years here with us now at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. But he's quite the expert in dealing with spills of this sort. So we're so glad to have him on board and working with us and guiding us through this stinky, sewage-laden mess. So over to you, Dean.
Hey, thank you, Betsy. And thank you everybody for joining us. I want to thank everybody who's, been supporting us and following this issue and taking action and obviously donating to us. We really, really appreciate it. We need the support. Before I even start, I just want to say and we dealt with the plane crash last year. And just because I was the person out there, I want you to understand that this impacts every single person within the organization. Everything that we've been doing, we're still managing our legislation in Virginia and Maryland, but we've had to drop things and deal with this major disaster and this response. And so I'm just going to kind of walk you through on this, because I've dealt with sewage spills. I was a river keeper for 14 years in North Carolina before even coming here. And, but this is one of the largest sewage spills in U.S. history. And so basically on March 19th, I was actually getting oral surgery. I was out of it. And this is when the spill happened, or the broken interceptor pipe happened. And then on Tuesday, as I was kind of coming to and getting back to work, I would heard about the spill, and I was led to believe that it was largely contained in the C&O Canal, or in the process of being contained. There was acknowledgement that some of it had gone in the river or was going in the river, but that was being contained, and I felt somewhat relieved about that. I knew I would have to learn more about it, but literally by the end of that day, I was starting to get messages and emails from people with information about, hey, this is all going in the river. Like none of this is in the canal right now, which is not what I was hearing with the media. And so, my response was to obviously get out there on Wednesday morning, first thing. And I will say it was an honor. Davy Hearn, three-time Olympian, 10-time world champion paddler, native to this area, lives right near here. He's the one that met me and showed me where the sewage discharge was going right into the river. And this is one of the two sites where all the sewage was upwelling. They called it a geyser going into the river. If you see this middle picture here, this is where we started sampling, and this is where, initially DC Water said it was a 60 million gallon pipe of flow. They somewhere after the first couple days downgraded that to 40 million gallons. We're still wondering where that other 20 million gallons per day went to. And those are questions that we'll continue to ask. But this right here, Betsy kind of went over this, but it's down near Lockhouse 10. And I will say this is one of my favorite stretches of the river. Betsy and I and members of our team, we float from, through Mather Gorge, down past Old Anglers to this spot. We take out here. I've swam right here at Lock 10. To me, it kind of breaks my heart, this area, this impact where it's happened. This is a timeline of what we put together. We can come back to this. But again, we were out there on the 21st was the first time that we visited. Again, media was continuing to report on Wednesday that that it was being contained in the C&O Canal. There was really no mention of it being in the river or going into the river, right? And this number is wrong. It should say January 29th. That was my bad. But by day two, right? I mean, or day three, we're already talking about 120 million gallons based on those conservative numbers by DC Water, right? 40 million gallons per day. People are like, where'd you come up with these numbers? We're basing it off DC Water, right? DC Water, though, wasn't saying how much water. So we were having to do our own kind of just rough estimates on what was going in. But this, again, this is the sewage discharge. This is the actual river right here. I think it's really important for people to understand the river is in extreme drought right now. Davey Hearn and the other paddlers told me that this was the lowest they'd ever seen it. Usually you can float a raft right in here, even in the summer, late summer. This is extremely low. So my point is there's not a lot of push of river water, not a lot of flush that's going on. And this is why while the 40 million gallons a day, if you look at this middle picture, is going on right now, since it's been drastically reduced, you can walk right over to that channel, that island over there, just to give you an indication of just how low the river is. But folks downstream at Minnie's Island sent this picture of fish kills. This was literally on day 2 or 3. So there are already impacts happening with this sewage spill going into the river. And again, I was getting increasingly alarmed on day 3 that the media was already was continuing to talk about it being contained in the canal, and not one drop had gone in the canal, right? We went back out on day 5, and I think it's important to understand that at this point, this was Friday, the big storm was coming, right, on Saturday. And I was like, wow, basically, and DC Water had been talking about containing this spill by Sunday. And I was really concerned, like, wow, basically, and again, look at this river on the picture on the left right here. That just shows you how low the river is, right? And this is while all this is flooding in to the river at high flows. But by day 5, we're already talking approximately about 200 million gallons of raw sewage going in the river, which already puts this at one of the larger, if not one of the largest sewage spills in U.S. history. And so Evan and I went out there, one of our staff people, and I knew it was really important that we grab samples. And but more importantly, I asked Fritz, our comms person, to send media out with us because DC Water, they got mad at me for saying that that DC Water misled the public. But the bottom line is they confused the public, and I think they were okay with the fact that the media was continuing to report that it was being contained in the C&O Canal. Again, by day 5, not one drop was in the C&O Canal. And so I thought it was really important to get media out there on that Friday before the storm came, because I knew the media was going to start talking about the storm and people iced in, and it was all going to be about that and not about the river. And basically, if they had gotten containment by that Sunday, as they were hoping, this all would have been one of the largest sewage spills in U.S. history. Basically, would have been swept under the rug. It would have been a he said, she said type of thing. And so that's why I felt getting media out there, looking at this flow. And again, at this point, DC Water was controlling the narrative. They had everybody up top at the canal. They were doing interviews up there. Nobody was going down to the river. We're the ones that took people down to the river to show them, look at this volume of water that's just gushing into the Potomac River of raw sewage. And so we sampled on day 5. We sampled the direct effluent. We sampled downstream, right downstream at Lock 10, the actual takeout where people recreate. We sampled at Old Anglers upstream to get kind of a baseline because we suspected obviously it would be clean water upstream. And then we wanted to sample downstream. We sampled down at, I'm sorry,
Fletcher's?
Fletcher's Cove. Thank you. Sampled at Fletcher's Cove. And it was just really important because what the media was telling us, the response from DC Water was this is Maryland's problem. We're responding to the spill, but that it's not impacting DC Water. And we grabbed a sample, and basically what our sampling data showed was that the effluent, the actual sewage, was 12,000, roughly 12,000 times higher than safe standards for human contact. But even down at Fletcher's Cove, it was about 69 times higher than the safe standard. And again, this was still ongoing, right? This was still early on in the spill, right? So that's kind of why we got out there, why we did the response. I just think it's important, having the experience. Luckily, I dealt with the Dan River coal ash spill back in 2014, and I learned a lot through that process. One of the things that I learned was the media was very important to set the narrative because the entity that causes the problem, in that case, it was Duke Energy, was trying to control the narrative that there wasn't really big problems with their coal ash ponds, that this was a very isolated incident and the impacts to the river were not significant. I think what's really different about this is that when I dealt with the Dan River coal ash spill, basically not only was media involved, but the EPA was directly involved. And they were actually out there. There was continuing conversations with EPA. We were out there sampling and finding other points where contamination was coming from the coal ash ponds, not just the breach. EPA was asking us for our data. They were all coming behind us and sampling to verify what we were finding, if it was true or not, and then providing us their data. They were making public responses to the public. In this case, EPA has been non-existent, and so has DCDOEE, the agency that has technical oversight, regulatory oversight of DC Water. And so if you see this sign right here is actually by the Park Service. At the time, there were no signs that were put up other than by the National Park Service. Eventually, DC Water put up signs warning people about the dangers of raw sewage, but they are not a public health agency, neither is National Park Service. And we were just kind of stunned that they have continued over and over again to try and stay in that area of advising people and getting it wrong about the threats to the river and the public health. And I'll get into that in a second. But our data, we felt was really solid. So this is now day 6. This is the Saturday right before the storm. DC Water, this is when DC Water says they started to largely have it contained in the C&O Canal, right? So by day 6, you have roughly about 240 million gallons of sewage that's gone into the river, and it's still not contained, right? DC Water then is trying to spin this new narrative of it being contained. But again, here comes the ice and snow, right? And which created a lot of complications. We know that some pumps froze. There was some additional releases that occurred, right? This is the actual discharging from the pumps into the canal, right? And so what they did is they basically just put a dam in lock 10 right before the lock, and they started having pumps come over the C&O Canal from the actual broken interceptor pipe upstream, and they all the way up to lock 14, right? So if you walk up to lock 14, all the way from lock 10, lock 11 has pumps coming in, but most of them are in lock 12 and lock 13 if you're familiar with the C&O Canal. And then at lock 10, all this runs down the canal and gets diverted into these pipes or whatever, cofferdam type things that funnel the water into the interceptor pipe, where it then goes to Blue Plains rather than have it discharging into the river. And this is a good thing, right? I mean, it's not the ideal spill prevention plan, but it's still at least contained mostly in the canal. That's day 7. I think it is worth pointing out, though, this is now January 27th, right? Day nine, right? Now, DC Water is beginning to say it's contained, and a lot of it was, right? And you can see the flow is a lot slower. The thing that I want to point out here, though, is why we think that there was still some significant releases, is that the snow and ice happened all day Sunday, and by Monday everything was iced over. But as you can see, even after Monday, this is that basically there have been at least some releases that washed away the snow and ice, which takes a significant amount. So that's why I believe. And when I walked down to the site on Tuesday after the snow event, basically Monday, everybody was frozen in. Um, I was the first footprints down there. So nobody from DC Water had gone down, done any sampling. Nobody from DC Water had gone down. What was down there, though, was those signs that I had showed you earlier. And when I walked down here with camera crews, there was this additional follow-up media. Again, I just believe that there was some additional sewage releases. And basically, some of the people that we have on the ground talking to the crews said that some of the pumps had frozen up and caused some additional releases over that time, which led to additional releases, right? We got out there and sampled in partnership with University of Maryland on January 28th. This is now day 10. Again, releases are continuing to occur, right? We actually had to bust through the ice just to grab some of the samples and some of the locations. Obviously not at the spill site, but certainly downstream and upstream at Old Anglers, right? And just a hats off to Evan and our team and the students and the University of Maryland and Rachel Goldstein. Literally it was treacherous conditions, ice covered snow. People were falling down, trying to get samples. It was really dangerous, and having to bust through the ice just to get the samples. So the amount of effort it took, it wasn't just your easy normal sampling that was taking place. It was real difficult and challenge to do. And so on January 29th, this is when DC Water declares full containment, right? And I was out there just a day or so after, and it was largely contained, but we were continuing to hear there may be releases. I just felt it was a PR move by DC Water they really wanted the public to believe that this was taken care of and fixed. And we know that other groups had put out information based on DC Water's talking points that this was contained 100% in the C&O Canal at this point, right? And I just thought that was a little premature. And sure enough, and I will say, when we were down there, right after the snow event, DC Water crews were down there trying to remove the signs that were warning people to avoid contact with the water. And I was like, "What are y'all doing?" I was asking them if they were going to take samples, and one of them had a drill in his hand. He said, "No, we're down here to pull the signs away." And I was like, I couldn't even believe it, right? So I was literally going to start filming them, and they ended up turning around and walking away because I think they realized we're going to document that they were going to remove these public health notifications. And this has been our message for quite some time now, that we need the public health authorities to step up. We are getting calls and messages every day asking us if the river's safe, right? And that's a real problem where our data is very important. But again, I just thought it was premature for DC Water to declare full containment, right? So we released I guess, we did sampling on February 3rd, and basically we collected additional data. And one of the things that we found with our January 28th data was at the site that the levels were about 2,000 times higher than safe recreational standards at the spill site, right? That was January 28th. We sampled again on February 3rd with the University of Maryland, and we found it to be 4,000 times higher than safe recreational standards. So E. coli levels were trending up, even though the message going out was that it was being contained and there weren't any additional releases. I think our data was really important because DC Water then on day 16 had to acknowledge that because of rocks in the interceptor pipe and some flows and the extreme cold was causing additional sewage releases. Our data reflected those releases that were just collected the day before their press release went out. The There's going to be 4 to 6 weeks delays. This has been reported in the news because of the rocks and boulders in the interceptor line. Um, Again, DC Water in their press release on February 4th said E. coli data shows only slight increases. And I can tell you at 4,000 times higher than safe standards for recreational use is not safe, and it's not slight. And I just was really starting to get frustrated. They actually called me on day 6 of the spill and said, "Hey, you told the public that we're misleading people." And I said, you put out this communications that confused me, the media. You confused the mayor's office. They thought this was being contained. So don't blame me for this. But I did go back and instead of saying misled, like in one of my social media posts, I said confuse the public, right? I tried to be a little generous. But now I'm going to sit here for the record and say, I think they are intentionally confusing people and misleading people by putting stuff like this out, right? They want this problem to go away. And we've said all along, why on earth is DC Water trying to stay in the sphere of trying to fix the pipe, collect the data, and then report out the data? This is where public health agencies, DC, DOE, should be doing their jobs. They're the ones that should be putting out information about E. coli data, not DC Water. DC Water has a vested interest in making it seem like this problem's taken care of and is going away, right? So we released our data in conjunction with University of Maryland on February 5th, right? And basically, we sampled 8 sites. So we expanded our sampling location. We sampled all the way down to National Harbor, a lot of the Georgetown waterfront. And I'm not going to go through all the data, but the bottom line is we still showed E. coli levels of significant concern at the site. And I think it's important for the public to understand that E. coli is like a proxy or an indicator of other pathogens or bacteria that's in the river, right? And University of Maryland went one step farther and they actually started sampling and testing for some of those pathogens or some of those bacteria. And what they found was Staph aureus, right, which can lead to staph infections. They found MRSA. I think everybody knows what MRSA is. Prevents, antibiotics from working. They found MRSA at the spill site. They didn't find it downriver, but they did find Staph aureus at a third of the sampling sites, and we found elevated levels of E. coli at samples downstream all the way into Georgetown, right? And so that was data, right? We just collected the data. We let the labs, state certified labs, University of Maryland, do the analysis. They put out their own sampling, which I thought was really, really important to get an assessment and a handle on, because DC Water's putting out, only slight increases. Well, what does that mean? So we got a lot of press and media on it to continue to bring attention to this issue. I thought it was really good. Then on February 6th, just this past Friday, I was kind of shocked. DC Water then puts out a press release basically saying that only 243 million gallons was released to the river. If you go back, right, by day 5, it was or day 6, roughly about 240 million gallons. So basically what DC Water is saying that over the course from day 6 now to day 22, roughly, they've only released an additional 3 million gallons, right? That's what they're saying, right? But more importantly, they said that their data shows that water quality is meeting EPA standards for safe recreation, basically trying to contradict what University of Maryland was saying. And again, theirs is E. coli data. Our data is E. coli. I'm not going to get into battle of data here, but I just thought it was highly inappropriate for them to do that. And so that was February 6th, right? And then obviously this weekend comes along, this horrible cold snap comes, right? And everybody knows that it was just freezing cold. The river's starting to refreeze again. And basically one of the things I should mention is that University of Maryland said that because we're getting a lot of questions from people about, hey, what does this mean for the river? Is it safe downriver? There was polar bear plunges, 2 of them planned, right, to go in the river. DC Fire Department was practicing drills and putting people in the river to rescue them during these icy events. And I had firefighters calling and messaging us, is it safe? And there's no public health notifications that were issued whatsoever by any agency. And somebody from Montgomery County Public Health Department who met me at the site said that DC Water was basically controlling the entire response, and that they were deferring to them. And I just couldn't believe it, right? I was really kind of stunned. And so this was frustrating. But basically, uh, DC Water put out a press release yesterday acknowledging that due to the extreme cold and high flows, that they acknowledged another major release, but they didn't say how much. Uh, uh, Reporters that have been talking to DC Water told me that they said it was about 600,000 gallons plus, right? Almost another million gallons of sewage in the river. I suspect these are conservative estimates. But again, I think DC Water is going to have to revise their number of 243 million gallons. And I think they have to be honest that they can't keep claiming that the river's safe. And I think it's a mistake for them to do that. And again, been demanding that public health agencies respond. Well, thankfully, Montgomery County did respond to University of Maryland's data. And they said, you know what, we've seen enough. We're going to issue a recreational use public health advisory just on the side of caution based on the available data, right? And so hats off, and I guess Prince George's County has done that. Charles County's done that. And for those of you that don't know, even before all this, way downriver, Maryland Department of Environment issued a shellfish consumption advisory, basically about 70 miles downriver from the spill, in the abundance of caution. That was based on some modeling that was done, very conservative modeling. It wasn't based on any data downriver that was showing harm because it hasn't made that way, it hasn't gotten that far down there yet. But they were just being cautious, and that's what we're asking for DC government to do. Why aren't you issuing this public health recreational use, right? Because people are fishing, people are coming in contact with the water, like those firefighters, right? Thankfully, the polar bear plunge, those are going to be kind of in person, hosing down water balloon events. People are not going in the river, and that's a good thing. But I think it's really important to emphasize again, we're not a public health agency. Our mission is to eliminate sources of pollution, protect the public's right to clean water and use and enjoyment of the river, and basically be a watchdog for the river. And we're going to continue to do that. But it puts us in a really difficult position when all these people are asking us. We want public health authorities to have information on their websites and be doing the collection and data on this, right? So this has just been kind of the whirlwind timeline in the middle of all this. Like I said, it's been all hands on deck for our organization and our team to respond and sample. We're going out there tomorrow. I just met with Council Member Charles Allen out at the site. We toured the whole site as well as with the Chief of Staff for Council Member Pinto. And they have the same concerns that we do, right? We have tried to get a meeting with DC DOE. They literally will not respond back to us about meeting. We have tried to reach out to EPA. We've not gotten a response from EPA. I just don't understand these agencies whose mission is to protect the public health and the environment are literally deferring to DC Water over and over again. And yet DC Water continues to get it wrong every single time about the river safe, about there won't be spills released. And it just keeps going on and on. And I just don't understand why anybody at DC City Council, the mayor's office, is not reining DC Water in, because there's literally no lack of account. There's no accountability on their part. So that's really kind of our presentation. There's probably some stuff I missed, but hopefully we can pick it up in Q&A. Betsy, if you think there's anything that I missed, please feel free to chime in, and then I'm happy to take questions.
I answered a few questions just by typing answers, and I saved a bunch of them for our discussion, Dean. I just wanted to sort of add to what Dean was saying about the confusion, whether intentional or not. Most people I have spoken with about the spill believe that when they heard about the bypass, they had no idea that it was going into the CNO canal, right? So we've turned the CNO canal into an open pit sewage. So there's that first part. But the second is when containment was reported and the bypass, people misunderstood that. And I think there was knowledge that people were misunderstanding that because most people I have spoken with, but even very knowledgeable people about the river, thought that meant that there's nothing getting into the Potomac River. And that is simply not true and hasn't been true at any point in this. The bypass has greatly reduced the amount of raw sewage that's going into the Potomac, but that's because it's going into the canal and then being piped back into the system. So just imagine, when you get, I don't know, a road blocked and you have a detour. The detour here is by using the canal as the pathway for the sewage as it goes back into the system. And then, of course, the releases keep occurring from the the interceptor pipe as well, and those go straight into the river. And that is going to be the case for at least the 4 to 6 weeks it takes to fill in that pipe. So I want to throw some questions at you, Dean, and people feel free to keep throwing them in there. We'll take everything we can get here to in this hour. The first is this expected to impact the Northern Neck?
You know, I we really just don't know enough. Again, you have low flow situation here and you have all this ice. I think there's going to be releases that continue for quite a long time because of this ongoing discharge and the fact that some of this is trapped in the ice. But we really don't know. I, I guess if I had to guess, I would say probably not that far down, because the river does have, you know, pretty significant assimilative capacity, but, will it lead to potential algae blooms in the summer or maybe some fish kills? It probably will lead to low dissolved oxygen level. There's an area in the lower Potomac, the last 40 miles or so, at least at the bottom of the river, where there's like almost zero dissolved oxygen, which puts a stressor on fish. And when you put a big slug of nutrients like that, it certainly could complicate or cause additional problems there. And it's certainly not good for the Chesapeake Bay and all the work that's been done to restore the health of the bay, right? So it remains to be seen, but this is why there needs to be a lot more monitoring and data and information and analysis, right, beyond what we can provide. And I think DC Water and DC City Council, they're going to need to pony up some money for that type of monitoring.
Next one related, and you just touched on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about the conditions, the drought and the ice, and how that is impacting the concentrations, flow, and containment of the sewage?
Well, I can only tell you what various public health experts have said, right? I mean, basically, we know that Staph aureus, for example, can get contained in the ice and pretty much lay dormant. And then when it meets warmer waters, gets released back into the environment and becomes a real public health risk again. Where that happens in the river, I don't think anybody knows. But again, this has been part of our frustration is for DC Water to not only kind of claim full containment, but then basically say the river's safe. When we know that some of this has to be trapped in the ice, at least that's what the experts are saying. And then we don't know like what may have led, because again, low flow situations, right? You have an impoundment right downstream from here, Little Falls. You have the Sycamore Island group, right? Club. Are there potential sewage being contained in some of those sediments there that become a problem later? All of that is possible. And I don't think anybody has a real answer to this. We do think some modeling is really important to see like what this impact could be. But again, this is just such an extraordinary amount of sewage during extraordinary times where you have low flow and then all the ice. And then an ongoing release that DC Water wants to continue to tell people is largely being solved, but then keeps showing that there's major discharges going to the river. And that's why we've just said, regardless, the data that has been provided by University of Maryland is important, and we'll continue to release that. University of Maryland will, as we'll release our E. coli data. but that's just a minimal amount of data, and I just think there needs to be ongoing sampling and monitoring all the way into the summer months. And one of the things I said to Charles Allen was that, for quite some time, DCDOE has been asking for daily monitoring because there's so many people recreating in the river, and so many people using the river. And people are asking me, like, so is the summer just a wash? And to me, this really breaks my heart because the river has come so far. And anybody who knows our organization knows we put out Swimmable Potomac Report. We've been advocating for lifting the swim ban. There's more people using the river than ever. There's this massive waterfront revitalization, and we think that's an amazing thing for the river. So, I think the only way to restore public confidence in using the river is we need daily monitoring. And the mayor's office has prevented that funding from going through over and over and over again, and now has actually cut funding that was for groups like ours and Anacostia Riverkeeper and other groups for weekly monitoring. We are going to continue our weekly monitoring regardless without that funding. But I think there needs to be dedicated funding to restore the public's confidence, and there needs to be a public notification system. I think that's just one thing that needs to come out of this, but there's a lot of things that need to happen too.
Thanks. Can you talk a little bit about the CNO Canal and I'm going to change the questions just a little bit because I know the context of it, but what you've seen there in terms of the sewage buildup and what that might do to the soil and the health of the canal and the wetlands and ecosystem around the canal.
Well, we have these pictures on the slide, but if you get a chance, go to our Facebook pages, either Potomac Riverkeeper Network or Potomac Riverkeeper, and there's a lot of videos that kind of show there's at least 6 or 7 major pipes that start all the way up near Lock 14 and pump a lot of sewage into. There's only waterfalls of sewage. I was just out there just literally, an hour ago, and I can tell you Lock 10 is literally filling up with raw sewage. And so you literally have 3 or 4 foot of this gray sewage that's in the canal and then sewage water over top of it. And it's filling up. So they're going to have to do some remediation, suck all that stuff out of there. That's a whole nother a whole nother problem that they're going to have to deal with because access to that is limited to, just to the tow path. And I don't know how they're going to get trucks and crews over onto that and safely do it without doing harm to the canal. So that's DC Water's problem to figure out. But um, I don't know what the answer is to that, but they're going to have to do a lot of restoration and cleanup at the canal site. And what that looks like, I think, remains to be seen. And again, this is why, we don't pretend to have all the answers, right? We're out there just trying to respond to this and set the narrative straight about what's happening with the river, push back on DC's water, what they're saying that, basically the spill's largely been contained, and there aren't releases happening much anymore. And we're just doing the best we can, but I think it's going to take a lot of different, uh, experts to kind of come together. And we're the Potomac Riverkeeper Network, so there needs to be somebody else that comes on and deals with the canal restoration. We're worried about the river because it's the lifeblood of the region. Millions of people use it. We have watermen downriver that depend on it for their livelihoods. It's a drinking water supply for 5 million people. So our focus is on the river, but obviously I bike the canal. I've used it. I love it. I hope there is some plan that's put in place. And I think there needs to be some advocates just for the canal, like us advocating for the river.
Along those same lines, can you talk a little bit about how the sewage might impact the bottom of the river?
Well, again, I can only tell you what experts, this is such an extraordinary sewage spill. I think it's really hard to say, but I will say when I was working in North Carolina and there was some, dealing with hog waste discharges from, 30, 40 million gallon hog waste lagoons that based on some of the research at NC State and others, that basically there's times where when you have enough sewage, it can lay dormant in sediments, particularly areas, and this is why I'm concerned downriver with Sycamore Island Club. Is there the potential for some of this fecal bacteria to lay dormant in the sediments, and then you have kind of a weather event that resuspends it into the river, and all of a sudden E. coli levels spike and it becomes unsafe again. I don't know what that looks like. People have asked me about macroinvertebrates and the impacts on the river. I will say, when we sued the city of Alexandria for their naphthalene and coal tar discharges to the river. In addition to fixing the problem, one of the things that we required was a supplemental environmental project of putting $300,000 worth of freshwater mussels back in the river. And mussels are critical filter feeders, right? They filter 10, 15 gallons of water per day. And I really think that, there needs to be some ecosystem assessment. DC Water says they're working on that. But I think they need to step up. And again, in addition to showing confidence through testing, rigorous data analysis and testing on a daily basis, I think there needs to be some restoration efforts like, that we required the city of Alexandria to do and put mussels back in the river and help the river to assimilate and clean itself back up and not just some lip service that the river's safe. So I think that's one thing. But again, I'm not an expert, right? We need others to come to the table and help inform us about what is happening. And I will say we've heard from like tribes down the river from the Piscataway Conoy or and Piscataway tribe about their concerns about, they use the river for fishing and subsistence. This is like a real blow to them. They're really devastated over this. And so, what that means for them, what type of restoration efforts need to go to restore that. I don't really have the answer for that, and I don't want to pretend to have the answer. I'm just saying we're doing the best we can and figuring out things that are good for the river that I think needs to happen. And we're open to other ideas and thoughts from other people that have expertise on this issue.
Our next question is about what we can do to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen in the future. And I want to just add a little bit of information here
Yeah.
that we know that $265 million was allocated to DC Water. They have it in hand for repairs of, in fact, the Potomac interceptor pipe. We don't know why that hasn't happened yet. So I don't know if it's a scheduling thing. That's just not information we're able to get in large part because we're not getting answers or meetings with bodies we're reaching out to. But just want to kind of put that into frame that there was already awareness that this 60-year-old pipe was susceptible to different types of problems and perhaps even catastrophic failure like this, and money was allocated for it, but it obviously wasn't fixed. In terms of future, do you want to answer that, Dean?
I mean, I just think, I obviously I'm disappointed that there was really no spill containment. I mean, DC Water didn't even have a plan to divert sewage in this 200-year-old C&O canal. So that was kind of just an emergency spill containment situation. I just feel like, this is one of the largest advanced sewage. It is the largest advanced sewage plant in the entire world. Um, and they discharge about 384 million gallons to the river every day. This is 60 million gallon pipe per day. I just would assume they had some plan for spill containment, but they didn't. I think that needs to be part of the plan in the future. I think, ongoing maintenance. Now they have a maintenance plan that they're supposed to be sticking to, but I think, the most important question is what Betsy raises, and so has Council Member Charles Allen. Where is this funding? Why wasn't it used? You had money to fix this broken interceptor pipe. And yet this happened, this disaster happened, and it's continuing to happen. And I think that's the most important thing to understand. This is still continuing to happen, even though media is starting to shift away from it a little bit.
There are a number of questions about have other places responded, Alexandria, Virginia, et cetera. No. Maryland is the only body we know, and then the recreational and shellfish alerts that they put out. We know they've also been out on the site. In terms of Virginia, you will see in the webinar chat an action alert that goes to DC and Virginia asking again for them to do something to help monitor this, help provide information to communities to help us. This is, we're a little tiny nonprofit group. We can't be the only one out there doing the monitoring and providing information to the public. So you can take that action and ask for that to be done because it's not being done right now.
You know,
Um, yeah,
oh, I'm sorry, Betsy.
no, go ahead.
I would say Mayor Bowser must step up and show some leadership on this. And again, that data, as Betsy said, it can't be us and it can't be DC Water either, right? And so I think that's really, really important point of this because people are asking us, like, what are the long-term impacts? What's the summer look like? We're still dealing with the short-term response, right? We want public health advisories. I'll give you a really good example. Some of the boat captains are asking me if it's safe to catch fish, right? I'm like, listen, this is not I shouldn't be answering this question. I just basically said if you're going to, make sure you put gloves on, cover your wounds, clean your hands immediately after touching those fish, right? Then one of these boat captains goes back to a reporter and says, "Hey, Riverkeeper said I can still fish." This is the nightmare that we're stuck in, and this is why we need to just point to a recreational use advisory, and if they have questions, talk to the public health department. I don't think this is very much to ask. And thank you, Montgomery County and the other counties like Prince George's County and Charles County for stepping up and showing some leadership. But where is DC, DC DOE, the mayor's office, and certainly Virginia? But this is DC's problem. They should be showing leadership, not sitting on their hands and not deferring to DC Water. And I've continued to hear this from agencies and people that DC Water is controlling the response. And it's very clear they are, and they're getting stuff wrong. Like they miscalculated on their reporting data. That was the news that Betsy and I were responding to yesterday. Then we get all these flurries of media requests asking us to respond to DC Water's mistake. They had a reporting error in their E. coli after telling people the river's safe. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that they're doing. And honestly, if I just feel like any other company that made this many errors in 3 weeks, reporting errors, miscalculations, misstatements, somebody should be fired. But obviously, that's up to DC Council and David Geddes, who runs DC Water. But this is just unacceptable, and I'm tired of responding to DC Water. We just want at least, the very least, these public health agencies to do their job, and then that way we can start looking at some of the long-term things that may be needed for the river.
So this is a slight softball question, but with a caveat. I'm going to put the caveat on first. We are not taking any volunteers out to the site with us. You should not go out and try and sample this on your own. There are dangerous pathogens in there. Our river keepers and our staff are highly trained on this for safety. But in other circumstances, what possibilities do we have for community residents, particularly those downstream in Southern Maryland, to do testing in their area?
I mean, we have our water quality monitoring program, but that doesn't start till the summer. We have 30 sampling sites that we do upriver in DC and downriver. So, if you want to be part of our water quality monitoring program, we would love to have more volunteers. Please come out to our cleanups, that sort of thing. But this is just a tricky issue, as Betsy mentioned, right? I mean, we cannot advocate for a volunteer to put themselves in harm's way and risk getting, MRSA or some type of contamination that leads to a massive infection, literally could kill you. It's tough. I will say I've thought about it. Like, DC Water, as we mentioned earlier, there was a major release on Sunday, but we didn't find out till Tuesday. And, I feel like that information should be reported immediately to the council or whoever, DC, DOE, I don't know. But I've thought about, it'd be great if we had people out there just monitoring the site on a regular basis. And we've had some great volunteers on days that we can't go out just to keep an eye on if there's still releases occurring. But I don't know how else to keep DC Water honest. Honestly, it's a real challenge, but they do continue to mislead people, and I am frustrated. And I just feel like in a perfect world, we'd have somebody out there just at least monitoring that flow, that discharge, to see if there's releases happening, because and we still don't have a good idea of how to estimate what that flow is. So I don't know. That's probably not the best answer, but it's the best we can do under the circumstances right now.
I'm going to take one, Dean, because you probably don't have this
Please.
information because it's brand new. Someone asked about are we looking at air and odors? And actually, a colleague that we have worked with a bunch at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health on toxic metals and other water-based compounds has a colleague there who is going to help us by coming out to the site with a monitor to look at what's going into the air and whether there's cause for concern about what's becoming airborne from there. And again, those are public health experts, so we feel like we will wait until they have information to report back before letting know anything on that. But we'll be happy to report that out when we get that information. Um, so a lot of people are asking questions about this summer and what this means.
About what? I'm
The
sorry.
summer.
Oh, this
The
summer.
summer and as this warms up. I mean, we are going to need help in figuring that out. I think what one of the things that Dean already mentioned would be tremendously helpful, which is real time or daily monitoring of the Potomac in the summer months when people are getting in there all of the time. And
Mhm.
that would be funding to go to DC Department of Energy. It'd be great if they had grants come out for nonprofit organizations like us because we will be doing that, but we do weekly. So it's the best we can possibly do with the resources we have to let people know. And we start doing that in the end of April and continue through mid-September. So basically the time period when people are going to be in the river. We're also hoping to, I'm kind of hitting a bunch of different ones here in a cluster because we will not get through all of these. That we're hoping to continue working with experts at University of Maryland. And in fact, the team is going out there tomorrow again to collect samples. We'll be looking at the pathogens, the bacteria, but also we're going to do a panel and hold some samples for looking at heavy metals or other contaminants because wastewater treatment plants, when you have all of the inputs, include industrial facilities discharging into that treatment plant as well. And that's just something we haven't even gotten to um, look at yet. But again, from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, they can run those tests for us and let us know if there are any things that really spike out. And we will be reporting those on our website and they probably as well. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as I mentioned earlier, DCDOE has requested repeatedly over the last couple of years funding for daily monitoring and a public notification system. And I think that must be funded this summer if they're going to restore confidence in people using the river.
Yep. So we're starting to run a little low on time, so it might just, I'm sorry we haven't gotten to absolutely everyone here. There have been a few questions about accountability and whether that's something we're looking into. Of course, accountability is really important. Right now, we're focusing on the immediate needs, trying to keep people safe and get up-to-date information. There'll be more to discuss later. We still don't know a lot about how the heck this happened and how that money that was allocated wasn't spent. So there's a lot of questions our team needs to answer as well. A number of people asked about modeling. Maryland Department of the Environment has been doing some modeling. I spoke with someone over there yesterday, and they said when we get a second to breathe, they'd be happy to talk to us and run us through some of that. That's all I can say about that because it's pretty far outside of our league. And in terms of next actions and preventing this from happening, we have been speaking to some congressional offices, trying to get some funding in for long-term monitoring and ecosystem restoration here. I have no idea if that will be effective, but certainly any of you who have pathways there, keep pushing for this. This is not unique, but for the scale and size of it. There are infrastructure failures all over the watershed, all over the country. on a regular basis. And these kinds of things, Dean and I, in our careers as river keepers, I can't think how many times we have been dealing with raw sewage overflows like this. And if you ever see one yourself, you can tell what's coming out sometimes, right? There's very identifiable things in there in addition to the smell. So just think about that when you're going out to these areas, and you might see stuff that people flush down toilets or down the sink in all of it. Dean, I'm going to leave it to you kind of for the last 5 minutes here for your thoughts, reflections, whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I just, like I said earlier, thank you for everybody who's just been very supportive of following this issue and putting pressure where you can. I mean, that's part of what we do, or, bring pressure. When we can't litigate or pass a law, a lot of times it's shame and pressure. And I think there needs to be a lot of pressure on this issue. And again, thank you everybody for donations. If you're not a member of Potomac Riverkeeper Network, I hope you will become one. Again, this is why I point out this has been exhausting to our team, and it's put a lot of strain on our organization. And despite limited capacity and despite our work in the legislature, both in Virginia and Maryland, we've responded to this and continue to respond to this using every resource we have available. But we are limited in resources. So all your support is just very, very important. And again, we'll be running an action alert, kind of putting pressure on Mayor Bowser specifically. I don't know what more to do, but there needs to be kind of a separation with DC Water and the public health issues that need to be addressed, and monitored over a long period of time in conjunction with DOE and other agencies. So DC Water just needs to step out of that. And I think there needs to be some broader accountability. And then again, we're going to continue probably work on this for, a long time to come, like people are asking about, potential enforcement actions or accountability. I mean, that's all stuff. When all the other groups go away, we're going to be the one here still working on that. And I think that's really, really important. A lot of the stuff that we work on, whether it's legislation or fixing, like, we started dealing with Dominion's coal ash back in 2015. We're still working on that, even though we got legislation passed to clean up 2019. We're still monitoring and keeping track of that and holding them accountable. And this is not going to be any different, right? So we're not going to go away, and we really appreciate that support. And I don't know what else to say, but just thank you.
Just a couple things. I put the donate link in the chat, and we also have the action alert link in the chat. So if you want to take action, you can just look for that right now. It will also be on our website. We are gonna capture the questions we didn't answer here, and I promise that we're going to look at them and see if we can get some information to you. But I cannot promise that we'll give individual answers for all of these questions because we're pretty spread thin at the moment. But we're going to try and continue to get as much information as we can out to you. Dean and I will be doing a briefing on this issue before some of the House of Delegates committees in Maryland on Friday. We're hoping, again, we can find out more information. I know DC Water will be there and get a better understanding of how this happened, what their future plans are, what happened to that money that was allocated. And we're going to keep you as up to date as we possibly can. And if you have resources or others that you know that could help, reach out to us. Ashley Duncan, who's behind the screen right now, helping us coordinate and helping getting information out to you all. She answers the admin. So the info at Potomac Riverkeeper Network, and we're responding to everyone as quickly as we possibly can with our small but mighty staff during this difficult time. And Dean, I just want to thank you for your leadership on this, for going out there under all kinds of horrible conditions where you had to hammer through the ice to take the samples, and everything that you're doing to help keep all of us safe and protect the river.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Have a great day.